Welcome back once again to this educational channel called Learn Bio with Janet. I'm teacher Janet and today we'll be starting Form 4 Biology, Chapter 11, KSSM syllabus. And the title of this chapter is Immunity in Humans. So we'll be studying 11.1 Body Defense. The learning outcomes for this lesson are as follows. For subtopic 11.1 Body Defense, after this lesson, you should be able to define A. Immunity, B. Antigen, and C. Antibody. Next, you should be able to describe the three lines of body defense in humans, namely A. the first line of defense, B. the second line of defense, and C. the third line of defense. For the first line of defense, there are two different types of defenses: physical defense or barriers, and chemical defense or chemical barriers. Now, for the second line of defense, B, there are three components: fever, inflammation, and phagocytosis. So you should be able to describe all this. And for the third line of defense, the third line of defense will be studied in the next video. Let us look at some terms that are going to be used in this chapter on immunity. The first term is pathogen. A pathogen is commonly known as a germ. Alright, it's called a germ. G-E-R-M. So think of gen here, G-E-N, and connect it with germ. So a pathogen is a microorganism that causes disease. A microorganism is an organism that's very tiny and it cannot be seen with the naked eye. So examples of pathogens are bacteria, viruses, fungi, and parasites. For example, there are bacteria that can cause cholera or coughs and so forth. Viruses, there are viruses that cause the dengue fever and also chicken pox and the common cold. And fungi, some types of fungi can cause skin disease. So all these organisms, microorganisms that cause disease are called pathogens. However, not all bacteria are pathogens, right? As an example. So some bacteria are beneficial to us and they don't cause disease, so they are not pathogens. Right, now let's go on to the second term, antigen. An antigen is a foreign particle that enters the body and stimulates the immune response, that is, the production of antibodies by lymphocytes. So remember again, you have the GN here. This is not a, these are the bad guys, and the pathogen and the antigens. All right. So an antigen is a foreign particle, benda asing, that doesn't belong to the body. So when it enters the body, the immune system, our defense mechanism, will recognize it as something foreign, not of the body, and so the lymphocytes will be stimulated to produce chemical substances called antibodies into the blood to destroy these antigens so that they do not cause any disease or problems in the human body. All right, so the defense mechanism is always on the lookout for these antigens. And once there's an antigen, they detect and they recognize an antigen in the body, they will start to take action, and the lymphocytes will start to produce antibodies to destroy the antigens. Thus, we can look at this term antigen as meaning antibody generator. Anti for antibody and GN for generator. So when an antigen enters the body, the lymphocytes will start to produce or generate the antibodies to destroy the antigens. So example, so lymphocytes are actually white blood cells, as seen here. Special white blood cells that can produce antibodies. They have a big round nucleus in the center of the cell. Right, examples of antigens. Protein molecules on the surface of invading pathogens such as bacteria that have entered the bloodstream, and toxins. So let's refer to this picture. This picture shows you a pathogen here, such as bacteria or even virus. Now on the surface of the pathogen or the microorganism, there may be protein molecules. All right, and these are considered to be the antigens by the defense system in our body, the foreign particles. So the lymphocytes will start to produce antibodies that will act on the antigens. All right. and that's called the immune response. We will be studying this more in the next video and in subtopic 11.2. Now, let's go on to antibody. So an antigen causes the formation of antibodies in lymphocytes. So what are antibodies? Antibodies are proteins. An antibody is a protein found on the lymphocyte surface, or a protein produced by lymphocytes into the blood plasma to destroy a specific antigen. Example, agglutinin is an antibody. So the lymphocyte will produce an antibody, a specific antibody, to destroy a specific antigen that has entered the body. Okay, so these are called antibodies, and the antibody has a shape, the molecule of the antibody, which is a protein, has a shape like a Y. That's why you see most books draw the antibody as a Y-shaped structure, because actually it has a Y-shaped structure like this. All right, and it will bind to the antigen, the specific antigen, and destroy the antigen after that. The next term is immune response. What is it? So an immune response is the interaction between antibodies and antigens that causes the antigens to be destroyed. So we know that antibodies destroy antigens, but how do they do it? Let's have a look at this picture here. Now, this picture shows you the Y-shaped antibody. It binds to the antigen. So this structure here is the pathogen, and the molecule on the surface, the protein molecule maybe, is called the antigen, the foreign particle that is recognized by the immune system. So the immune system has produced the antibody that is specific for that particular antigen on the pathogen, on the surface of the pathogen. Then the antibody from the lymphocyte will bind to these antigens here, antibody and antigens, and it forms this structure called the antibody-antigen complex. After that, the antibody will carry out certain modes of action to destroy the antigen, all right, and to destroy the pathogen too. So that is called the immune response, when there's an interaction between the antibody and the antigen in an effort to destroy the antigens. Now, immunity is the body's ability to fight infections or disease caused by pathogens and other foreign bodies through specific attacks on that particular pathogen. So, specific attacks on the particular pathogen, meaning the production of antibodies that will bind to the antigens and then destroy the antigen. And in that way, they destroy the whole pathogen. Okay? So, immunity is the body's ability to fight infections or disease caused by pathogens. For example, if a person has strong immunity against a disease, it means that even if the pathogen were to enter his body is able to fight the infection by the pathogen and destroy the pathogens using antibodies, and he will not fall sick. So on the other hand, a person with very weak immune system or weak immunity or low immunity towards a disease will fall sick when the specific or particular pathogen that caused that disease infects his body. He will fall sick because he has low immunity towards the disease. Okay, so immunity is the body's ability to fight infections or disease caused by pathogens. Now, immune. When we say that a person is immune to a disease, it means that his body can fight and resist the disease and he will not fall sick. For example, a person who has recovered from chickenpox, the disease called chickenpox, or in Malay we call cacar air, he will have a high level of antibodies in his blood after he recovers from chickenpox, and he will be immune to that disease, meaning that if he's exposed to the chickenpox virus again, okay, he will not fall sick from that. Okay, his body will be able to fight and resist the chickenpox virus. We'll be studying more about immunity in the subtopic 11.2 and also in the next video. Let us now discuss the body's defense mechanism and the 3 lines of defense. That is the 3 stages whereby the body can defend itself from the attack by pathogens and other substances. So that's the first line of defense, and the aim of this line of defense is to prevent the pathogens from entering the body. So in the first line of defense, we have the skin. For example, the skin which covers the surface of our body has sweat glands that produce sweat. And sweat contains an enzyme called lysozyme, which can break down the cell walls of bacteria, and it can destroy pathogens. Next, we have the mucous membrane, which are found in various parts of the body, for example, in the trachea. And in the trachea, there are cells that produce a sticky fluid called mucus, which contains lysozyme. Same like sweat, contains lysozyme to destroy pathogens. The mucus also helps to trap dust and bacteria from the air that is inhaled into the respiratory system. After trapping the dust and bacteria, the cilia, which are hair-like projections on the epithelial cells, will help to sweep the dust and mucus to the pharynx or to the throat region, and then it will be coughed out or it will be swallowed into the digestive system, where it will be acted on by the hydrochloric acid. So there are also other components of the first line of defense, such as lysozymes found in tears and saliva, blood clotting mechanism, and hydrochloric acid. If the pathogens manage to get past the first line of defense, then they have to face the second line of defense, which includes fever, phagocytosis, and inflammation. And lastly, we have the third line of defense that acts when the pathogens have entered the body tissues and the bloodstream. So the third line of defense is the immune response by lymphocytes, which produce antibodies to destroy antigens, as we have discussed in the slide just now. Now for the 3 lines of defense, we will be discussing the first line and the second line of defense in this video, and the third line of defense will be discussed in the video after this, the second video. Right, let's start with the first line of defense. It consists of the physical and chemical lineup or barriers that prevents pathogens from entering the body. So the main aim of the first line of defense is to prevent the pathogens from even entering the body. Okay, so the first line of defense are non-specific defenses because they act against all types of microorganisms, and they are not directed against any one particular pathogen. So they are non-specific. So they are called general defenses. They act on all microorganisms. Let us now study the first line of defense in more detail. So the first line of defense consists of the skin, lysozymes, blood clotting mechanism, mucous membranes, and hydrochloric acid. Let's start with the skin. The skin is the physical defense that prevents the entry of pathogens because it has a dead keratinized layer that is a tough physical barrier which is difficult for microorganisms to penetrate. So this dead keratinized layer is found on the uppermost part of the skin here. It consists of dead cells that have been filled with keratin, which is a tough protein that is also used to form the nails, right? So this will cause the cells that are keratinized to form a tough physical barrier, which is difficult for microorganisms like bacteria to penetrate or to gain entry into. Now, continuous shedding of dead cell layers on the skin surface makes it difficult for microorganisms to grow. So the dead cell layers on the top of the skin is continuously dropping off. Shedding means to drop off. So the microorganisms that try to grow on the skin will be removed in that way. So it's difficult for them to grow there. Now, skin also acts as a chemical shield through secretion of sebum from sebaceous glands. The oil and acid in the sebum prevents growth of microorganisms, and the acid causes the skin to have low pH of pH 5, okay, around pH 4.5 to 5.5, around there, that range. So it will inhibit the growth of bacteria because acidic conditions are not conducive for the growth of bacteria. Therefore, skin is not just a physical defense. It also has chemical defenses through the secretion of sebum. So sebum is a type of oil secreted from the oil glands or sebaceous glands. It also contains acids, and this causes the skin to be acidic. So this will prevent the growth of bacteria. Now, sweat. Sweat is secreted by the sweat glands, which look like a pile of coiled ropes here. And sweat contains lysozyme, an enzyme that breaks down the cell walls of bacteria and then destroys the bacteria. Okay, so you look at this word lysozyme, it consists of two parts. Lyso or lysis, meaning to break down. Zyme stands for enzyme. Okay, so it means the enzyme that causes breakdown of the cell walls of bacteria. So lysozymes. Now lysozymes are very important to our body as a defense mechanism. So it's found in a few body fluids like tears, mucus, saliva, and sweat. And it is an antimicrobial protein. Antimicrobial means it acts against the microorganisms or the microbes. That breaks down the cell walls of bacteria and other cells, and it will destroy the pathogens in that way. Okay, so for example, in the eyes, we don't have skin on the eyes to protect us, so we have tears instead to destroy the bacteria. Now, thirdly, blood clotting mechanism. So it helps to seal the wounds or cover the wounds and prevent the bacteria from entering through the wounds, right? So when somebody has a cut on the skin, it is like an open door for the pathogens to enter. Therefore, the body will quickly carry out blood clotting in order to seal the wound so that the bacteria cannot enter through the wound. The next two components of the first line of defense are mucous membrane and hydrochloric acid. Now, what is a mucous membrane? It is a membrane that covers the surface of internal organs and lines the body cavities. It can secrete a thick protective fluid called mucus, which is very sticky, right? So the mucous membrane lining the respiratory tract or the trachea secretes mucus, which contains lysozyme, just like for sweat, and it will destroy the bacteria in the inhaled air that is going down to the lungs. Furthermore, the sticky mucus traps dust particles and pathogens on it, and then the cilia on the epithelial cells acts like a broom to sweep the mucus and the trapped particles to the pharynx to be expelled or to be swallowed into the digestive system. So let's take a look at this picture of the trachea. Now, on the internal surface here, lining the internal surface, are the epithelial cells. So there are two types of epithelial cells. The first type is called the goblet cell, and it produces mucus. It has a depression here, and it produces mucus, which contains lysozyme to destroy the bacteria in inhaled air. Furthermore, the sticky mucus will trap dust particles and pathogens. Thirdly, the cilia are found on other epithelial cells. Cilia are tiny hair-like projections that can move, alright, to sweep the mucus containing the trapped particles and pathogens upwards to the throat or the pharynx, the region of the pharynx, which is in the throat area, to be expelled, either through coughing or it can also be swallowed into the digestive system where the hydrochloric acid will probably act on it. Okay, so there are three actions here concerning the mucous membrane in the trachea. Okay, mucus contains lysozyme to destroy the bacteria. Sticky mucus traps the dust particles, and the cilia will sweep the mucus and particles to the pharynx. Now, next and lastly, we have hydrochloric acid, which is found in gastric juice. in the stomach. So the hydrochloric acid is highly acidic, having a pH of 2 to 3. This will destroy microorganisms in the food and drinks that enter the stomach. So for the first line of defense, we can categorize the different types of defenses or different modes of defense into two types: physical defense and chemical defense. For example, skin acts as a tough barrier to prevent entry of microorganisms because of its dead keratinized layer. So this is a form of physical defense. Blood clotting occurs at a wound to seal off the wound and prevent entry of pathogens. So this is physical defense. Mucus traps dust particles, and cilia sweeps mucus to pharynx. All these are physical defenses. Now, the chemical defenses usually involve a chemical substance that can destroy or inhibit the growth of the pathogens. For example, lysozyme is an enzyme in sweat, tears, and saliva, and also mucus that can break down the cell walls of bacteria. Okay, so it is a chemical defense, a type of chemical defense. Skin. The sebaceous glands in the skin secrete sebum, which is acidic, and cause the skin to have a low pH of about pH 5. So this inhibits the growth of bacteria. So this is a chemical defense. Hydrochloric acid in the stomach kills the pathogens. So here's a diagram that shows the first line of defense as we have discussed just now. So this for the skin, we have the dead keratinized layer that forms a tough barrier that's difficult for the microorganisms to penetrate. Then in the skin, there are sebaceous glands that secrete the sebum or oil that has acids in it. And this makes the skin have a acidic condition. The pH of the skin is very low, for example, pH 5, and this acidic condition prevents the growth of bacteria. Then we have the sweat glands that secrete sweat. Sweat contains lysozymes, special enzymes that break down the cell walls of bacteria, and thus they destroy bacteria and other pathogens. Now, blood clot. So when a person gets a cut or a wound, the blood clot quickly forms, and as you can see here in this picture above, the blood clot consists of the red blood cells or erythrocytes that are trapped by the fibrin fibers at the wound. So this will seal the wound and prevent the entry of bacteria and other pathogens. So the eyes secrete tears, which also contain lysozymes. So lysozymes are the enzymes that can help to destroy the pathogens by breaking down the cell walls of bacteria, for example. So they are found in many, a few body fluids, such as tears, mucus, saliva, and also sweat. Then in the respiratory tract, such as the trachea, mucus is secreted, which contains the lysozymes and also traps dust and pathogens because it's very sticky. Then the cilia will sweep the mucus to the pharynx, that is to the area near the throat there, so that the person can cough out the mucus, or he can swallow it into the esophagus and down to the stomach where we have hydrochloric acid. So this picture shows the epithelial cells in the trachea, and this type of cell is the one that secretes the mucus. Okay, it's called a goblet cell. And then these cells here have cilia, which is like a broom that sweeps the mucus up to the pharynx and away from the lungs. Okay, lastly, we have hydrochloric acid in the stomach, which destroys the pathogens in the food as it is very acidic. So here's an acronym that can help you to remember the 5 components that we have discussed just now. Think of HM score. HM means the headmaster, right? Sometimes headmasters do scold students who have bad behavior, as an example. So H is for hydrochloric acid, M for mucus, S for skin, C for clotting. So the O is not used, but think of clotting, there's O there, clotting of blood, and L is for the lysozymes. Okay, D is not used. So HM scope, to remember the 5 components of the first line of defense that we have discussed. We have already discussed the first line of defense. Let us now go on to the second line of defense. So if a pathogen or microorganism manages to get past the first line of defense, then it will have to face the second line of defense that will try to destroy it too. So the second line of defense includes fever, as shown here, phagocytosis by the phagocytes, and C, inflammation, where part of the body becomes hot, red, swollen, and painful. So pathogens can get past the first line of defense, for example, through a cut or a wound. The wound is like an open door for them to enter into the skin, into the tissues there. So let's talk about the mechanism of the second line. Now, firstly, it is not specific, meaning that they act against all types of microorganisms and are not directed against any one particular pathogen. Just like the first line of defense, which is also not specific. All right. So let's discuss the first component of the second line of defense, and that's fever. So fever occurs when a person's body temperature is beyond the normal body range for himself. All right. So different sources give a different value of when fever occurs. All right. And I'll just generally state that it's somewhere between 37.5 degrees Celsius to 38 degrees Celsius, around there, if it goes beyond that much, that value. Okay, so we will not get into the argument about that because it's different for different people and also for among different sources. They give different values. So fever increases activity of phagocytes, which destroys microorganisms, right? So this is the benefit of fever. It will increase the activity of phagocytes, the white blood cells that carry out phagocytosis and engulf and digest the microorganisms, so that they will destroy more microorganisms. All right. So when fever occurs, we know that probably there's some infection somewhere where pathogens may have entered the body and get past the first line of defense. Now, fever also inhibits the growth of bacteria, as the raised body temperature is not conducive for the growth of bacteria. So it will slow down. Inhibit means to slow down or to stop the growth of the bacteria. Now, phagocytosis is the second component of the second line of defense. So phagocytosis is carried out by phagocytes. So what is a phagocyte? It is actually a white blood cell or leukocyte that can carry out phagocytosis. Examples are white blood cells known as neutrophils and also the monocytes. For example, this is a neutrophil. It has a lobed nucleus, and a monocyte has a bean-shaped nucleus. B, what is the definition of phagocytosis? Phagocytosis is the process by which phagocytes, like this one here, engulf, trap, and then digest microorganisms or other particles like dead cells by using enzymes to digest the microorganisms. So when an infection occurs, that means the pathogens have entered the body tissues, then the phagocytes will move to the infected area and enter the tissue fluid where the pathogens are, and they'll enter the tissue fluid from the blood, enter the tissue fluid from the blood through the pores of the capillary wall. So the phagocytes are like the mobile soldiers that are deployed. They are transported by the blood to the areas where infection has occurred so that they can do their duty, which is to attack the pathogens and to destroy them by phagocytosis. Then if the phagocyte encounters a pathogen, the phagocyte will engulf the pathogen, that means surround it with a pseudopodium, and after that it will release lysozymes, okay, into the area where the pathogen is, and then it will digest the pathogen. Let us now discuss the stages of phagocytosis. How does a phagocyte destroy a bacterium? So firstly, if a bacterium has entered the body tissues, it produces chemicals that are foreign to the body. So the phagocyte is attracted to these chemicals, and it will move towards the bacterium and then extend its pseudopodia to envelop or engulf the bacterium to form a phagosome. So bacterial ingestion, meaning the process whereby the phagocyte encloses and envelopes the bacterium, forms a phagosome, which is a vesicle that contains the particle that has been ingested. Next, what is the phagocyte going to do with this bacterium? It is going to digest it. So to digest the bacterium, it needs its organelle called the lysosome, which contains the enzymes called the lysozyme, all right, that's going to digest the bacterium. So first of all, the lysosome must fuse with the phagosome. So phagosome fuses with lysosome to form a structure called the phagolysosome. So this is the phagolysosome. It consists of the phagosome here and the lysosome. All right. Okay, so next, now the lysozyme can be secreted into the phagosome. So the lysosome, the organelle here, will secrete its lysozyme or enzymes into the phagosome in order to digest the bacterium. Next, the lysozyme, the enzyme, will then digest and destroy the bacterium by breaking down its cell walls. Now, the phagocyte then expels the remains of the digested microorganism out of the cell. So now the microorganism is dead already. It has been destroyed. Okay? So these are the various stages of phagocytosis that we have to memorize. It can come out as a structured or essay question. Now, we've already discussed phagocytosis, but I would like to show you these pictures, which are the commonly used pictures in the exam. So again, this set of pictures shows phagocytosis by the phagocyte. The word phago means to eat, and then cyte is a cell. So it's a cell that eats. Okay, so here we have a phagocyte such as a neutrophil. Now, the bacteria here will produce a chemical, all right, that causes the phagocyte, like the neutrophil, to be attracted to it. And so the neutrophil will move towards it. Next, the neutrophil or phagocyte will engulf the bacteria using pseudopodia. And it will form a vesicle here called the phagosome. Phagosome. This is the phagosome, where the bacteria are contained. Now, to digest the bacteria, a lysosome, which is an organelle containing lysozyme, the lysosome must fuse with the phagosome. And then enzymes from the lysosome, enzymes from the lysosome called the lysozymes are released into the phagosome to digest the bacteria, and then useful products are absorbed. Now, other than phagocytosis and fever, another component in the second line of defense is inflammation. So what is inflammation? Well, when someone gets a cut, let's say on the finger, at first there's bleeding. Blood will flow out, and after a while, the area will become red, swollen, and painful. The injured area will become red, swollen, and painful. Those are the signs of inflammation. So, inflammation is triggered by tissue damage, and it is a defense mechanism that functions to protect the person from infection and to prevent infection. So, inflammation is an immediate response and a defense mechanism that destroys microorganisms at the site of the damaged tissue, neutralizes the harmful actions of microorganisms and toxins, and clears out damaged tissues and initiates tissue repair. For example, to destroy the microorganisms, phagocytes will be transported to the area where there's tissue injury. And these phagocytes will carry out phagocytosis to destroy the microorganisms. Also, to clear out the damaged tissues, the phagocytes will engulf these tissues and digest them so that they will be cleared out. So actually, how does inflammation occur? Now, when a tissue is injured or damaged, it will release, some cells in the tissue will release a chemical called histamine. Alright, remember this chemical, histamine, which stimulates an immediate inflammatory response. So histamine is actually responsible for the area turning red and swollen, becoming swollen. Alright, because histamine causes blood capillaries to expand or dilate at the site of the tissue injury, so that more blood will flow to the infected area. Now, why is that so? Why must more blood flow to the infected area? To transport more phagocytes to the site of injury. Alright? So the area will turn red when the blood capillaries expand, as more blood is flowing through it. And then histamine also increases the permeability of the blood capillaries to phagocytes, so that more phagocytes can move out from the blood capillaries through its pores into the infected area to destroy the pathogens by phagocytosis. So these phagocytes are the neutrophils and the macrophages. Now, macrophages are actually formed from monocytes, all right? And the phagocytes function to engulf and destroy the pathogens by using the lysozymes. So symptoms of inflammation are that the inflamed area will swell, turn red, feel warm and painful. Now, why does it swell? Well, it swells because there'll be leaking of the tissue fluid. There'll be leaking of fluid out from the blood capillaries into the tissue. All right? During the inflammation. And this will cause the whole area, the area of the injury to swell. Now, pus is actually a combination of microorganisms, fragments of tissues, and white blood cells that are found in the badly infected areas. So, in Malay, we call this nana, pus, and it's actually a whitish, yellowish substance that consists of dead microorganisms, dead white blood cells, and fragments of tissues. So, let's discuss inflammation, all right? Now, this part is a new section, and I think you have to memorize all these facts here, okay, after explanation. So there are many things that occur. Now, just imagine if somebody has a cut, all right, on the finger or on the hand. So the tissue is injured, and that will trigger inflammation. So when the tissue is injured, certain cells will produce a chemical substance called histamine. Okay, remember this word, histamine. Now, histamine is the chemical that stimulates the inflammatory response, where there will be swelling, redness, and pain. So what is the inflammatory response? Okay, these are the things that happen that we need to know. So histamine will cause the blood capillaries to expand. See, from this size, it will become bigger. So blood capillaries will expand or dilate for two reasons. So that more blood will flow through the infected area here. This is the infected area. And more phagocytes will be transported to the area also to fight the pathogens that have come in through the cut or the wound. Okay, so it's like a war. So when the pathogens enter, the white blood cells are the faithful soldiers of the body. They have to move out of the blood through the capillary pores, and they have to take action to kill the invaders. All right. So another thing that happens is that the histamine will cause the permeability of the blood capillaries to the phagocytes to increase. That means the blood capillaries will become permeable to the phagocytes. So the phagocytes can move out through the pores of the capillaries. And when the capillaries become more permeable, it will also release more fluid. More fluid is released into the body tissues from the blood. As you can see here, fluid is coming out. And this will cause the infected area to become swollen. Okay, because of the fluid that accumulates here. Now, other than that, as we said, the phagocytes accumulate here, and they will carry out phagocytosis to engulf and then to digest the pathogens like bacteria. Clotting factors will also accumulate here in case there's a need for clotting at the wound. So the blood clot will then seal off the area, seal off the cut or the opening so that the bacteria cannot enter through the opening. But blood clotting is part of the first line of defense, not the second line of defense. It's in the first line of defense. Lastly, phagocytes carry out phagocytosis. Okay, that one we have explained, and you can see here. So the whole area will be full of the white blood cells that are attacking the pathogens that have tried to come in. It's just like an unwelcome intruder. So the soldiers of the body will try to destroy all these unwelcome intruders. Here are some very good questions that can be asked in the structured or essay questions and also for HOTS questions. So let us apply what we have learned in our BioBrain Gym questions. Number 1, state 4 events that happen during inflammation at a wound. 4 marks. Number 2, explain how the skin acts as a physical barrier and also a chemical barrier in the body defense system. 4 marks. Number 3, what are some good and bad effects of having a fever? 4 marks. Number 4, a man has a mild fever and was advised not to work for a few days. What steps can he take to treat his condition at home other than taking medication? 3 marks. Number 5, why is it better to use pH balanced soap and skincare products rather than products that are not pH balanced? So do think through these questions and jot down some answers. Then after that, you can refer to the answers in the description box below the video. That's all for this video. In the next lesson, we'll be studying the third line of defense and the actions of antibodies. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the next video. Do share, like, and subscribe. Goodbye.